Throughout human history, the Aral Sea in Central Asia was once the fourth largest lake in the world. It's the size of West Virginia, the only lake larger than it is Lake Victoria, Lake Superior, and the Caspian Sea adjacent to it on the Eurasian continent. But by the 1960s, a series of decisions by the Soviet Union began to destroy the Aral Sea. In the decades that followed, he's been shrinking, constantly shrinking. Currently in the 2020s, the remaining area of the Aral Sea, less than 10% of the original area before the 1960s, and more than 95% of its original water volume has completely disappeared. Actually, the Aral Sea is dead, and such a huge lake suddenly disappeared. It brings profound and all kinds of unintended consequences, is driving the entire Central Asian region towards disaster and war. It's no exaggeration to say, this is a map of the Earth in recent history. The most amazing transformation. It is also the worst environmental disaster in the past 100 years. And all this, a complete interpretation of human arrogance. Brought, before the 60s. The Aral Sea is already lying on the arid steppes of Central Asia, exists for thousands of years. The Aral Sea lies in the heart of Eurasia, located in a place with little rainfall, an area surrounded by desert, between the lake and the nearest sea, the Black Sea, about 1,500 kilometers apart. So the Aral Sea gets only about a fifth of its water from rainfall. That means the other 4/5, completely dependent on the two great Central Asian rivers that nourish him, originates from the Amu Darya River in the Pamir Mountains of Tajikistan, originating from the Hill River in the Tian Shan Mountains of Kyrgyzstan. The Aral Sea lies in the heart of the desert, although the evaporation rate is high. But for most of history, evaporation is roughly equal to the amount of water injected into the river, and limited rainfall. A delicate balance is maintained between evaporation and resupply. Rivers have flowed here for hundreds of years, so this sea has existed for almost all of human history, and almost always decided the local geopolitical landscape. 8th century AD, he became the furthest frontier of the Tang dynasty's westward expansion. 1,000 years later, become the frontier of the Russian Empire's eastward push. Now in the 20th century, the entire Central Asia region, including the Aral Sea, was under Soviet rule. In the 1930s, Stalin initiated a program called the Great Transformation of Nature, aimed at large-scale transformation of the natural environment and adjust the geography to meet the needs of industrial and agricultural development. And by the early 60s, when Mr. Khrushchev came to power, Natural Transformation Program, the focus has shifted to the geographical transformation of Central Asia. Plans to build a massive canal system, drinking water from the Amu Darya, and draw the waters of the Hill River, irrigation in Uzbekistan, and new farmland in the deserts of Turkmenistan. These new farms, mainly grown is what the Soviets called platinum. Cotton arrived in the 1970s. In the form of the Subcotton Project has further deteriorated. 1973 on the other side of Eurasia, Egypt and Israel meet each other in the Yom Kippur War. Defeat of Egypt. Then a peace treaty was signed with Israel, subject to recognizing Israel in exchange for the territory of the Sinai Peninsula. As a result, Egypt emerged from the Soviet bloc in the Cold War, directed towards the Western camp. To 1977, the Soviet Union has stopped selling arms to Egypt. Egypt is suspended all large-scale cotton exports to the Soviet Union. In retaliation about this, the Soviet Union further increased natural transformation efforts in Central Asia to promote domestic cotton production for a while, and it worked. By 1988, Greece has become the world's largest exporter of cotton, and we owe that to the Soviet Irrigation Bureau. They drink and irrigate from the Amu Darya and Hill rivers. But cotton in the desert, the high cost behind high flour production, is also emerging because the Aral Sea has started to shrink. To know that 4/5 of the water sources of the Aral Sea, both from the Amu Darya and the Hill, the Soviet Union drank from these two rivers, irrigation in Uzbekistan, and new cotton fields in Turkmenistan. So the Aral Sea has no access to these water sources. Balance of the Aral Sea. The amount of water flowing in is equivalent to the evaporation rate. This has maintained an equilibrium for hundreds of years, completely broken, since the evaporation rate remains constant. but the amount of water flowing in has dropped dramatically. The Aral Sea is rapidly drying up. And here's what makes things worse. The irrigation canals built by the Soviet Union were of poor quality, very inefficient. For example, the Kharkum Canal, which was completed in 1988, up to 3 cubic miles of water are diverted from the Amu Darya every year, across 850 miles of hot, the dry Karakum Desert of Turkmenistan. But the canals carry 30 to 75% of the water, are lost through leakage and evaporation. It was 2012. It is estimated that only 12% of the canals are in Uzbekistan, with anti-leakage ability. So in order to compensate for these inefficiencies, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, more water was drawn from the river to increase the amount of water in the canal, and the leakage persists. You know, under normal circumstances, Amu Darya and Hill rivers, every year to the Aral Sea, inject a total of nearly 14 cubic miles of water. This water source comes from the Chanshan Mountains, high above snowmelt and glaciers, and the Pamir Mountains to the southeast. But due to the Soviet Union's plan to transform nature and the construction of irrigation channels, the amount of water flowing through these rivers, the amount of water flowing into the Aral Sea has rapidly declined by more than 50%, down to just 7 cubic miles. And then, because Egypt decided in the 70s, stop exporting cotton to the Soviet Union, and the Soviet expansion of irrigation channels in Central Asia, the amount of water that flows into the Aral Sea through these rivers, by the end of the 1980s, down to less than a cubic mile, less than 7% of the natural water inflow before human transformation. The Soviets almost drained these rivers to irrigate the cotton project. Less than 40 years after the start of the project, in 1998, the volume of water in the Aral Sea has been reduced by 80%, and its surface area is reduced by about 60%. So far, the few remaining bodies of water in the Aral Sea are almost doomed to disappear. As the volume of the Aral Sea continues to decrease, the water levels are dropping. Reduced water exposure to sunlight results in water surface temperature accelerates. Further accelerates evaporation. As the volume of the Aral Sea continues to decrease, it creates a vicious positive feedback loop. The more water is lost, the Aral Sea is losing water faster and faster. By 2014, 95% of the Aral Sea's 1,960-year-old water has evaporated. Vanish! And now, what was once an ocean is almost gone, as shown in this satellite image taken in 2021. But what remains in the south is Uzbekistan, and all irrigated cotton fields in Turkmenistan. Uzbekistan. It remains one of the top 10 cotton producers in the world. It is also a major cotton exporter in the world, controls a considerable share of the global cotton market. It accounts for about 5% of global cotton production and about 10% of global cotton exports. Therefore, cottonization is the most important industry in Uzbekistan. It accounts for nearly 1/5 of Uzbekistan's total exports. The industry is state-owned, led by the government of Uzbekistan. The cotton industry in Turkmenistan is relatively small. It remains the 11th largest cotton exporter in the world and producer countries. But in order to maintain this huge cotton industry in Central Asia, the price paid, the destruction of Xionhe, the scale is incredible. The destruction is unprecedented in human history. In its heyday, Aral Sea, it was once one of the main fishing centers of the Soviet economy. 40,000 people were employed in the fishing industry. The volume of fish in the Aral Sea, about 1/6 of the Soviet Union's total. But by the 1980s, as the Aral Sea shrinks, the rest of the water has also risen sharply in salinity. Fish began to die in large numbers and disappear. As early as 1987, commercial fishing in the Aral Sea has become impossible. In the 1990s, endorsements crossed high waters, squeeze into depletion. No fish can survive. And that's not the only problem for fishermen. As the oceans continue to shrink, those fishing towns and villages, and a port that has been close to the coast for hundreds of years, suddenly I found myself several hours away from the water, even hundreds of kilometers away. The town of Aral had 50,000 inhabitants. It is the fishing center of the region. Ballistic time 2005 years. But it is more than 100 kilometers away from the remaining sea area. Even if the dam is built, some waters come back to life. But to this day, This town, it is still about 15 kilometers away from the water. Therefore, the town has been in decline over the past few decades. Tens of thousands of residents were forced to flee their homes, go make a living elsewhere. On this former lake bed, countless fishing boats can be seen scattered throughout the wasteland. Most of these ships were abandoned by their crews. It has been rotting in the sun for decades. The entire fishing industry and economy around the Aral Sea completely collapsed. This demise was exchanged for Uzbekistan and the prosperity of the cotton industry in Turkmenistan. But this is far from the only serious consequence. Before the Aral Sea dried up, the Aral Sea regulates the climate around Central Asia. Siberia goes south. Wind weakens as it reaches the Aral Sea, making winter temperatures warmer than usual. And in summer, the Aral Sea absorbs radiation and heat. This allows the temperature to be lower than usual. So the climate around the Aral Sea, far more pleasant than the rest of the Central Asian desert. Those places have severe winters, summer heat. The disappearance of the Aral Sea take away the role of climate regulation. Therefore, in winter, Siberian winds can drive in. In summer, there is no body of water to absorb heat, so only the Aral Sea disappeared. That's where it used to be. The average temperature in summer has risen by 2 to 4 degrees Celsius. That's not counting the additional warming caused by global climate change. In addition, as the lakes dried up, a new desert formed in situ, and the Arakan Desert. Basically here, it's a complete doomsday wasteland. You see, as the lakes dry up and evaporate, what's left of it keeps getting saltier. It's getting saltier. By 1998, its salt concentration reached 376 grams per liter. Its salinity is more than 10 times that of seawater. Comparable to Israel, Palestine, the extremely salty Dead Sea on the border with Jordan. And then as the lakes dried up further, more and more salt deposited in the gradually forming Aral desert surface. Since there is no ocean to regulate the northeast wind, the wind starts to lift dust. These salts, massive rock dust storms occur throughout the year. The scale of these dust storms is tremendous. They are often observed from satellites in space. The width can usually reach 150 to 300 kilometers. It's about the size of New Jersey. Wherever the dust storm sweeps, carry a lot of salt. Summertime, up to 30 to 40% of these dust storms are composed. It's pure salt, and these are from the north. A northeasterly wind moving south from Siberia. Add all this salt, swept through Uzbekistan, and irrigated cotton fields in Turkmenistan. And as you can imagine, that's very bad for the crops. To make up for this, peasants in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, we can only extract more water from the Amu Darya, flushing farmland, salt removed. This led to their farm, that is, planting raw crops. The amount of fresh water required is up to 4 times higher than usual to maintain crops, a reasonable level of growth under normal conditions. But here's the thing, the problem of continuously rinsing the soil to remove salt. Not only he is imported from salty, drawing more and more water from the rivers of the sea. It also washes away minerals from the soil and nutrients for crops to grow. Therefore, in order to make up for it, Uzbekistan and Turkey long used too much pesticide and fertilizer to irrigate their desert cotton fields. Dosage up to 4 times the international health and safety standards. For decades, there's a lot of overuse of pesticides, and chemical fertilizers are discharged directly into the river with the static flow. It eventually flows into the Aral Sea. As the Aral Sea dries up, these toxins remain in the newly formed and the expanding Arakan Desert. Now, dust storms are not only picking up a lot of salt, also mixed with a lot of toxins. And to add insult to injury, Soviet period, there used to be an island in the Aral Sea, Vozrezhdenier. It's in the middle of the Aral Sea, located in the heart of Central Asia, surrounded by water. The location is extremely remote. The Soviet Union is here, built a top-secret biological weapons research laboratory. The laboratory has tested a variety of biological weapons, including charcoal, plague, smallpox, etc. And laboratory safety standards are woefully inadequate. 1971, a batch of weapons and smallpox virus leaked from the laboratory, leading to a lakeside town. Several residents of Aral have died of infection. Hundreds of people were forcibly quarantined. Thousands more were vaccinated. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, 1,992 years in the laboratory, by Russian scientists working at the time. Hasty abandonment. Now, 2001. As the water level in the Aral Sea continues to decline, was Razdenier. The island became a peninsula connected to the mainland. Multiple containers in the lab were never properly safeguarded. Weaponized biological agents, nor in the Soviet Union, destroyed in a hasty evacuation after disintegration. Many of these containers were later. There was a leak. The most famous was in 2002. U.S. involvement. Assistance to Uzbekistan. Clear 10 Expeditionary Army burial sites on the island. Now this former island, fully integrated into the newly formed Aral. Desert. It's not clear how many creatures are there. Has been mixed into the area and is already poisonous in a salty dust storm. Despite this, dust storms blowing up from the new desert are known to cause many health problems in the Aral Sea region. Detected in blood, excessive use of pesticides, associated toxic chemicals, and in the breast milk of local mothers. The proportion of babies with low birth weight in the region, or the proportion of congenital abnormalities, is 5 times higher than in Europe. Former Aral Sea region under 5 years old. Child mortality is currently the highest in the world, second only to sub-Saharan Africa. Incidence of cancer and lung diseases also rose significantly. This toxic dust, the wind is blowing all over the world. Dust from the Aral Sea desert, as far away as Norway and Greenland, all found toxic pesticides in the dust, even contaminated the blood of Antarctic penguins. However, the most serious consequences caused by the Gan River in the Aral Sea has not really emerged yet, but it's almost destined to become a reality in the future. This could eventually bring Central Asia involved in the worst conflict of the 21st century. You know, with the disappearance of the Aral Sea, there's not a lot of evaporation in the area. From Siberia to the Tian Shan Mountains and the winds of the southern Pamir Mountains, the moisture carried is not as good as before. This causes precipitation in the mountains. With reduced snowfall, it's hard to maintain the glaciers that feed the Amu Darya and the Sur River, and it got even worse. Dust storms now blowing into the mountains, carrying a lot of salt, and dust covering the surface of the glacier further accelerates their melting process. Except for the global climate, changes in these local factors also contribute to these mountain glaciers. Today, more than in the 1960s, it melts 12 times faster, and the Soviets started this natural transformation program. Due to reduced blood pressure, the ability to replace lost ice and snow is also weakened. Because of this, only now do we often see such grandeur, and it went viral, like this one, an English trekker, photographed in the mountains of Kyrgyzstan a few months ago. The glacier collapse was captured in July this year. You need to know that this glacier is the Amu Darya, the main water source of the Hill River. They used to nourish the Aral Sea, not to mention almost all of their freshwater attacks. When the glaciers here will eventually melt to pieces, what little remains flows into the river. Central Asian countries will face unprecedented challenges. Kyrgyzstan in the higher mountains and Tajikistan rely on steep slopes for almost all of its electricity. Pilmunk's hydropower station supplied to Kyrgyzstan more than 90% of electricity. Monk's hydropower station satisfied Tajikistan 98% of electricity demand. Energy independence and security for both countries are tied to the water supply of these rivers. However, as the flow of water inevitably decreases, this prompts them to build more dams on the rivers to access dwindling water resources. But building more dams throttle more dwindling water resources. It will surely pose an existential threat to downstream countries like Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. They both depend on the river for their cotton industry. Because there is no cotton, both governments are likely to go bankrupt. Not to mention, since the 1960s, since the natural transformation began here, the demographics of the region, fundamental changes have taken place. 60 years ago, the total population of Central Asia was only about 24 million, but today, the population has increased by about 75 million, 3 times as much. And the biggest contributor to this growth is the Uzbekistan. The population of Central Asia has quadrupled in the past 60 years. Now the Uzbek population is approaching the sum of the other ethnic groups in Central Asia. Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Tajik, and Turkmen. Therefore, water demand in Central Asia is now several times higher. Before the Aral Sea disappeared, the water needs of the Uzbeks, most prominent, the borders of the Central Asian countries. It was drawn about a century ago, largely by Stalin. The goal is to ensure their future independence. The greatest conflict. Just as the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the various ethnic groups in the region lived together on the border. A prime example of this is in the Soks. These are two enclaves of Uzbekistan, surrounded by Kyrgyzstan. The residents are all Tajik. Due to such policies in the Soviet era, there are millions of Vuzis. The Buit people live in Uzbekistan, outside Stan, all over Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and Kazakhstan. With the water supply of two major rivers in Central Asia, it dries up. There will simply not be enough water to ensure everyone's needs and safety. Uzbekistan's geography, the most politically advantageous, can defeat other countries and make sure they have control of what's left. Here in the Fergana Basin, it's the population core of Central Asia. The Shell River originates here, make here, become a lush oasis in the vast desert. A quarter of Central Asia's population lives in this basin, and this is Uzbekistan. Kyrgyzstan, the political border with Tajikistan. They meet and they collide. Tajikistan, a narrow strip of land extending northward into the valley, mainly ethnic Uzbeks. However, this area, the partition of Uzbekistan into two parts, make its control of the valley and domestic. Other areas are separated under the pretext of national liberation, just as Russia tried in Ukraine. This is no longer a fantasy. Uzbekistan may also one day use this as an excuse, invade Tajikistan at some point in the future, not only to acquire more fertile Fergana Valley. What's more, if Tajikistan can be fully occupied, they can also control the source of the Amu River to ensure continued access to this, what little water is left of the river. At the same time, Turkmenistan, through the inefficient Karakum Canal, drink plenty of water from the Amu Darya to irrigate the country's cotton fields. However, 600,000 Uzbeks live in Turkmenistan, in Stan, just by the border of Uzbekistan, and they both happen to be on the Karakum Canal, near the starting point. It is this canal that diverts water from the Amu Darya, lead to Uzbekistan sewage. Ifuzi, Vikistan uses national unity as an excuse, waging war on Tajikistan to control Eminem and the source. So, it is equally conceivable they will use the same excuse, war on Turkmenistan, to control and destroy the Karakum Canal, so as to ensure full control over the rest of the river. Water resources. In this situation, Turkmenistan is almost doomed to collapse due to the Karakum Canal. Most of Turkmenistan's freshwater resources, still dependent on this, used for national life and the cotton industry. But in theory, Uzbekistan has an advantage in numbers. The demographic advantage makes it more likely to win future conflicts. Russia is facing a demographic crisis. Its military disaster on the Ukrainian battlefield. Moscow may now be powerless to stop. Uzbekistan is concerned about its attack by allies. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan are members of the CSTO military alliance. The alliance is equivalent to Russia's version of NATO. Once Uzbekistan launches an attack, both countries can request military assistance from Russia. However, in September 2022, Azerbaijan attacked Armenia. Armenia is a member of the CSTU. The player who once offered to the league was rejected by Russia because Russia is overwhelmed in Ukraine. Russia is already exhausted, a fading empire. They may not be able to do it either. I have no intention of interfering in the south. The growing geopolitical tensions in Central Asia. In this way, China may step in, but who knows if they're really willing to do it. After all, Xinjiang, Zhejiang issue still needs to be dealt with. The epidemic prevention policy is still being implemented. The diplomatic focus is also on Taiwan. No matter what happens, Central Asia is like a tinderbox that could explode at any time. If I were you, I will pay special attention to the situation there, especially developments in Uzbekistan. He is likely to become the next person in the next 10 years. The most watched countries. Ultimately, the Soviet Union's great natural transformation program. And in a way, it worked. He really changed dramatically. the natural environment of Central Asia. Its influence continues to this day. It's just that it didn't turn out as they wanted. Their attempt to conquer nature. This may be the first time in human history, one of the most profound lessons to be learned. When we try to play God, altering the way the earth functions, it's like playing Ho Chong and making a wish. Make a wish to him. Your wish may come true, but never as you wish. The Aral Sea disappears. The environmental curse that has befallen the entire Central Asian region will be in the future for a long time, with all of us. And the worst effects are yet to even be felt, because every time humans try to confront nature, nature will prevail because of natural time, billions of years longer than we are.